Alrighty, so yeah, this is our discussion, our podcast, I guess, about the books that we read. As you can see, I forgot my book today, but well, I have it at home, so I'll put that in the video. For the podcast, I forgot my book at home when we were talking about it, so I did just want to show here in the video that I do have the book. Here it is for anyone watching. You Don't Have to Say You Love Me by Sherman Alexie, and I will be showing this in class as well. But yeah, so the book that I read, it was called You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, and it was by Sherman Alexie, who is, a Native American man. Actually, they call themselves Indians, which I didn't know, so I will call them Indians also. So yeah, he grew up on an Indian reservation, and this is a memoir, like, to his mom. So there's some talk in there about how, like, he always saw his dad as, like, a really good guy, like, and everything. And so he always treated his dad really well with, like, respect. And then he always was, like, afraid of his mom. And so when she died, he wanted to kind of make a memoir about her and about, like, their relationship together. And so that's what this book is all about. And it jumps around a bit from, back in the day when he lived on the reservation to, like, more modern times when he's an adult, and also poems. So there'll be some chapters that are just like a poem, and there's like almost 200 chapters, because some of them will just be like the poem, next chapter, Okay. But one of the things that he really discusses a lot is, of course, growing up on the reservation. And, like, I don't know, we could probably talk about it more later, but I don't know if you know much about the Indian reservations.
A little bit.
But they have extremely high levels of poverty, crime, like rape, stuff like that. And so that's discussed a lot in the book. And the parts that really stood out to me specifically were the discussions of his own, like, sexual assaults that have happened to him. There's one time where he talks about how, they would have a party, like his family would have a party, and people would be drinking, and they would be all drunk, and he'd be in his room, and he had, over the course of his life, had accumulated like 40 knives, butter knives, and when they'd have those parties, he would stick them in the door jamb, like in the bottom of the door, so that no one could get into his room. And this was like 7 years old, 9 years old. He had figured this out early, that there's predators that he needed to protect himself from, which was just, like, heart-wrenching. It really was to read about that. And especially, for a young man, people don't talk about that much for, like, young men. Even though, I wouldn't say that the rates are necessarily, like, equal, but it is high. It's a high rate of young men who have those things happen to them, but it's not, like, normal to talk about. So when I was reading the book, actually, I spent a lot of the book on audiobook because I wanted to hear his words, how he said it. He did some of the things in accents, so it was kind of like, it was nice. I got, like, a better feel for it. But when he talked about those moments, I wanted to rip my headphones off. Like, it was or I just wanted to shut the book and close it, because it just was so sad to hear about that. Of course, that's not the only thing. There was a lot of discussion of, the white man. It's a really big topic of the book, how, Indians don't trust white people. Specifically, what I got from it was the government, honestly. That's, there was some talk about, like, your average white people being racist or saying things insensitive, but it was really, like, the number that the U.S. government had done on the people, like, just decimated them completely. Kept them reliant on the government. That was kind of the big thing I took from it, was that not only did they, like, destroy their culture and society, but that they basically made it so that they were, like, they had to rely on the government for anything, for housing, for food, for just basically everything. And so, like, there was like this weird kind of thing where it was like they don't like the white man, but they rely on him or her, whatever.
Yeah.
The government. And so I thought that was really interesting as well. Obviously, we know full well, some of the atrocities that have happened. But, and he did discuss this, I was thinking as well while I was reading it that, at what point does your culture or your society say, all right, like we're done with the government. Like we don't want them involved in anything because they're not really helping us, in the long run. Where do they start to say, like, what's happening in our community that we can fix ourselves? And he did talk about that a lot, which I found really interesting, because there is something to that as well. It's not just, what are all these bad things that have happened to us? At a certain point, you kind of have to turn around and say, what can we do to make our community better? And he talked about, expelling the rapists, even though they might be like, community members that are well respected, like talked about crime and stuff like that, and just getting to a better place than where they started, basically. I found that really interesting. The kind of the main topic of the book, besides those points, which really stood out to me, was his mother, again, like I was saying. And his mother was a very interesting woman. She lied a lot. That was a lot of what he talked about. Is she would lie, she would over exaggerate. There was one instance where she had told him that his mother, was the product of a rape. That's how she was conceived, and he believed that for a really long time until she died. He talked to his sister, and she said, no, she wasn't conceived of rape. Our older sister was. Our mom was raped, and our older sister is a product of rape. And he's like, what? Like, this story was applied to his grandma. He thought it was his grandma the whole time. She thought it was his mom. They both never knew who it really was, although it did seem to point to his mom being the case. She had moved to live with family. She got thrown off the reservation because she was just being like too wild, basically. Oh. And when she was there, her older sister's husband raped her, and she had a baby, and she came back to the tribe. And so it just kind of was like him coming to some realizations after his mom's death about who she was, and it's a very interesting story because there was a lot that I could relate to him on. Obviously not like the reservation, but like, poverty, not necessarily like the sexual assault, but like, physical abuse, stuff like that. Like I could understand really where he was coming from in those places, and then just kind of his struggle to kind of live in like a white world and still be like true to his culture. Because that was something that I noticed as well in the book, is that a lot of the not necessarily stereotyping, but like just the way that you should act is perpetuated by his own people. You know what I mean? It was like the white people might be like, you're not like Indian, like we don't see you as like Indian or whatever, which is like insulting. Yeah. If you are one. You know what I mean? And I mean, I think you should be able to see that outside anyways. But the Indians were also very like, oh, you're not Indian. Like, you're not Indian enough. You don't do this or you don't do that. And so that's not Indian. And so I thought that was very interesting as well. It was kind of like he's getting it from both sides because, he's been successful. He's very good at the English language, like not just speaking, but just like writing, and so, yeah, I mean, it was rough. Like, I guess I'm glad I read it, but I'm also like kind of pissed at Ravi a little bit because it was just like, it was horrible. Yeah. It just was horrible to read. But I think sometimes that's important to like feel that and to like really like internalize like what you're reading. And I think that's what reading does. That's so that effect that it has on us, is so different than other forms of media. Is it really makes you like take it on the inside and like it makes you really connect it to like your own life. So yeah, I mean that's what my book's about. That's my 10 minutes. So I guess you're up.
Okay. So my book was Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement, and it was written by John Lewis. And so this book was kind of like, it started with him going to visit his mom in the present day. And on his like journey there, he's like talking about, well, this is how it used to be. And that's when it goes into like telling the story of his life. And so he starts out by talking how his family came from originally from being slaves, and they were really poor, and some of them in the South didn't have many options but to become sharecroppers on land owned by former slave owners. And so they were still very poor and reliant and couldn't really go anywhere. So that's like originally like his family lived in this sharecropping world. And so his mom and dad, they got married, and they lived in this place like where their whole family lives, like their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, everyone around them was their friends. And his dad was still a sharecropper, and he ended up being able to buy his own house for like $300 and 110 acres of land. That was just like trash land. Like it wasn't any good or anything, but it was like his own. And so that's where John Lewis was born, or his birth name, Robert John Lewis. But he was like born in that very, they had like one small house where the kitchen was like a detached kitchen, and their house had 2 rooms and a fireplace. And they'd all gather together. They had an outhouse for a bathroom, no like running water type of thing. So they were like very, very poor. And so they like went to church like once or twice a month. And again, in their little city, it was like secluded. It was only Black people. He said like by the age of 6, he had only maybe seen like 2 white people, wow, which was like a mailman and like occasionally travel salesmen that happened to come through their little area. But everyone was their friends and stuff. And when he was 6, he like started going to school, and he loved school. Like school was everything for him, but he was upset because when you are in that kind of lifestyle, the kids have to work like their parents, and so they'd miss a majority of the school year having to go harvest the crops during crop time with their family. So he would like hide under the porch like when they'd leave so they couldn't find him, so he could catch the bus to go to school and stuff. So school was like what changed his whole life. He loved school. That's all he cared about, really. And so as he got older, like when he got to go to school, like he decided he was interested in the idea of going to college. And he was in the car one time and he heard like social gospel over the radio, which like they were preaching, and that's when he heard like Martin Luther King and stuff, and he was like, I want to be a preacher. And so he wanted to figure out, like, how could he go to college? But college was so expensive, and they were so poor that he didn't know how to do it. And then he found a college where he could work his tuition and board, and he could go there and learn. So he, sent an application to American Baptist something theological college. And so that's, when he turned 17, he went away to college for the first time, and this was his first time out of his little city of Troy, Alabama, into Nashville, Tennessee. That's where the school was. And so he went to school, and he met some people, and it was a Bible school, so they were learning how to be preachers and all that kind of jazz. So I'm just lost right now.
Yeah.
But so he met people, and then they formed a little group where they'd talk about social gospel and stuff. And it kind of, there was a man, Jim Farmer, where they kind of formed their group of the SNCC, where they were preaching together the theologies of nonviolence and stuff like that, and how they were going to start working towards integration in society. So they got together. They set up this plan of how stores were now integrated. Black people could shop at the stores, but they couldn't necessarily eat at the lunch counters. Right. So they were we're gonna start by going in and going up to the lunch counter and just saying can I order something? And so he just, like, they did that, and then after that, they'd be like, no, you can't be served, and they'd leave. And he was like, yes, this is the greatest thing, we did that. And that kind of what led to the sit-ins, where they'd go sit there all day, and they'd shut down the lunch counters, like, not serve anybody anymore. And so this kind of started sparking attention from people around, and this spread to other places where they kind of influenced this movement of doing sit-ins. And so, like, that, their thing got bigger, too. Like, their group, it had, like, white kids, black kids, kids from all kinds of colleges around. And so they were forming this, like, group that was, like, really getting something going. And then so he had this idea, like, something happened where they were saying, like, black kids could go to colleges now, but that really wasn't happening, like, different colleges that were integrated. And so he wrote a letter to, like, Martin Luther King saying, like, hey, I want to go to Troy State College and stuff. And then so he went and had a meeting with Martin Luther King and his attorney, and he was like, he was going to be the only black kid that is going to the school to start it. And he met with his parents and like over the summer. They were so scared. They were like, no, don't do this. And ultimately, like, he decided he wasn't gonna do that, and he stayed, and he went to his college, and kind of like this is where their little SNCC movement, like, took off. And I'm gonna check my notes real fast. And then that's when they started doing the freedom rides. And, like, have you heard of the freedom rides before? So there was, like, the desegregation of, like, public spaces. So this meant, like, the Greyhound places, like the no more colored versus white fountains, white bathrooms, you could be served. So their idea was they were going to do these freedom rides that, like, they were going to ride the bus. They were going to use, like, not just use the colored stuff. Right. And so he was talking to other people and other, like, big groups in the movement. And they were like, no, this is dangerous. Like, this is not a good idea. You guys, like, do not need to do this. And they ultimately, like, decided they were going to do it anyways. And so during, like, the big one, there was, like, a bombing on the bus. Well, he happened to be going to, like, a meeting somewhere else to do an interview to go do volunteer work in, like, India. And so he wasn't there for the one that got bombed, but that was the bus he was supposed to be on. And then so they thought they would stop there, but after this, they were like, no, like, we're still doing this, like, and they were still embracing that nonviolence approach. And so he came back, they were doing it, and that's when they went to Montgomery and stuff. And there it was really bad. They, like, showed up, and they're like, there was this eerie feeling. It was, like, so quiet, and no one was there. And then all of a sudden, like, out of the alleys, everything, like, here comes, like, mobs of people, and they just, like, attacked them. And, like, it was really bad.
That's
and
when
so
they brought out, like, the hoses and stuff?
Yeah, like they
dogs.
were doing, like, dogs, like, beating them with sticks, like, and there was, like, no one there to stop it. Like, they were talking about one guy from their group got, like, beat so bad that they didn't know at the time, but he was, like, going to be paralyzed for life. So they all went out, like, with this motion that when they were doing these things, like, they could, like, go there and lose their life. But yet they were still committed to, like, we need to do this. Like, we're here to, like, say, like, we're here, we're not going anywhere. And so they'd do this type of things, and they just, like, keep doing it. It didn't matter, like, what happened to all the people. Like, they'd do it again. They'd keep riding the buses, and, like, there was no stop. And sometimes it was, like, crazy to read. Like, he's like, you know, I got there, there's a eerie feeling, like, I got knocked out. Like, boom, that's all I remember, like, down to the pavement, and then they kept going. And so they did these, like, freedom rides, and they got, like, big attention. And then, like, once they kept going, like, these other groups, like, came to be more a part of it. And that, like, kind of was a theme through the book, that they would start these things, and then the bigger groups would come in and get, like, all the attention and, like, all the funds. Everyone would donate to the big groups, like the NAACP, CORE, and the SCLC, which was, like, what Martin Luther King was a part of. And so, like, in his dream, they're doing these things. They're doing the freedom rides. And so in this time, he gets, like, voted to be the chairman of, like, the SNCC, which is SNCC, their group that they had. So he's the chairman of that. He serves on the board for the group with Martin Luther King. And so he's, like, young. I think he's, like, 22. Like, he's very young when he's doing all this, which, like, was crazy to me because I've heard about most of these things, but I'd, like, never once until this book heard John Lewis. And so, like, he's giving this a personal accounts of, like, how he was in this. And they were talking about how, like, their big mission after that was to register voters in the South because they could vote now, but they were having, like, a hard time getting registered to vote because they wanted them to pass a literacy test, and they couldn't pass them. And they, like, weren't holding, like, the white people to the same standards, or they were just too scared because the police would attack them. They, like, were at risk for getting killed if they went to register to vote. So these groups would come in, like, with their, like, back strong grassroots techniques of, like, door to door, being with the people, living with the people. Like, they would talk about how there'd be, like, 20 of them in, like, a house, like, sleeping there. And so they're doing all this stuff for the movement. They're, like, doing marches, and, like, they were a part of the Bloody Sunday where they decided to do the march in Selma to, like, walk to go to Montgomery. And then he talks about, like, they walk across the bridge, and then boom, all of a sudden there's a bunch of people waiting at the end of the bridge to attack them. And they, like, got tear gassed, and, like, it was, like, really bad. He says, like, he got hit with, like, a baton thingy, and it talks about how he was, like, preaching, like, okay, we're not done this, and they're like, you need to go to a hospital. So he does, and his, like, skull was fractured.
Wow.
And stuff like that, and they're like, we're still gonna march. And so they did, like, the march to Montgomery, and then that's when all the big names came in to be a part of that march, where you can, like, see the pictures and stuff. But, like, here he is with, like, a fractured skull. He's still marching. Like, he was arrested over 40 times. He spent summers in prison doing all this, and, like, he was, like, huge in this movement. And his parents, like, it was, like, another world. Like, they found out he got arrested for the first time, and they were like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? And he's like, they just didn't understand. They were from this teeny place that their neighborhood was their world.
Right.
And so he's a part of all this stuff in the movement. And eventually, like, he holds this idea that was similar to, like, Martin Luther King of, like, creating a brotherhood of all people. But it got to the point in the movement where they wanted to, like, start pushing, like, the white people out. Like, they didn't need to hold such big roles in these organizations in the civil rights movement. And people started to get irritated with him, like, hey, like, you're not about the brotherhood. Like, you're not about this. And they were very bothered, I guess, by that. And so eventually, like, it led to a vote where he, like, they were re-voting for his chairman spot and that, and he won. But they wanted a re-election, and in that re-election the same night, they decided to, like, vote in Stokely Carmichael as the chair, and he, like, lost his spot in this organization that he, like, was part of the formation of. He held this thing, but because he, like, wasn't willing to kick the rest of the white people out of the group, that they were like, no. So then he went and, like, he got a job in New York. A friend offered him a job. He went there for a year, and he decided, like, he wanted to go back to Georgia. He went back to Georgia and, like, was a part of that, and he ended up being, like, part of the Bobby Kennedy campaign because he started to, like, really respect him. Yeah. As his, like, ideas changed through the years compared to, like, when his brother was president. And so he was, like, a part of that campaign, and when he was campaigning with him, that's when, like, Martin Luther King got killed, and that's when Bobby Kennedy ended up getting shot too. And after that, he kind of, like, felt lost, didn't know what to do, and someone else, like, offered him a job, and then he ended up going, like, working in Washington under Jimmy Carter and stuff like that. And then he was just, like, and the thing he was part of groups that, like, worked about diversity. They were working with elderly, poor people and stuff, trying to create programs to help them, but kind of ultimately these programs weren't doing nothing. So he didn't want to be a part of that. He decided to resign and go back to Georgia. Wow. And he was like, I need to do more. And then so he ended up running for a city councilman member eventually, and so he got this job in city council, and they didn't like him much in there too because he couldn't be bought, really. So he would be firm on his beliefs. There was no one that could really change his way from this. He, like, and that too, like, throughout the thing, he ended up running against a good friend of his for Congress, because after that he was like, I need to go one step further, going to Congress. And it was, like, a real big battle because his friend was already popular and liked, and people were like, John Lewis is kind of, like, quiet. He's a nobody. What has he done? And so it was just, like, this big thing, like, his friend that, like, was already doing stuff in popularity, but they're like, hey, he's been doing it too, just, like, silently. He's always been helping. Yeah. And he ended up winning, like, the position as congressman and stuff. And so he, like, went through this big journey of, like, starting all the way at the bottom, super poor, falling in love with school. And it was always like, what next can I do to help? Because even when he was a kid, he had these issues, like, with his family being sharecroppers. He's like, this is a scam. Like, you're never going to get up. Like, things have to change.
Right.
And so he dedicated his whole life to making change. And even, like, as a congressman, he was still held his ideas of, like, helping all people. It wasn't just about, like, bringing up Black people. It was, like, it's about all people. And so that was, like, what was really interesting in him. He never changed, no matter, like, how many people got mad at him or anything. It was always, like, no, like, I'm a man of the people. And he, like, really was about it. So.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some similarities between our two books because, you know, they both started off extremely poor.
Yeah.
And both kind of, I mean, not to the same extent, obviously, but both wanted to, like, escape that a bit and figure out how to do it. Sherman Alexie kind of did it on his own. Like, I'm gonna escape. And it sounds like John Lewis was more interested in, like, the community, making it better.
Yeah.
Even when, you know, they wanted to, like, resegregate, basically. Like, by pushing white people out, he's like, no, that's not what I want to do. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah, and it was interesting, like, when he was, like, holding all these positions, like, it said, like, I made, like, $10 a month, but, like, you know, they gave me somewhere to live, or we were staying with all these people, so he, like, never still had money. Throughout his whole life, he was, like, doing this as service.
Wow.
And stuff, which, like, I found was pretty interesting.
That is.
Yeah. And, like, it's, like, weird when you read about it, too. Like, in the sense of, like, coming from a first account, which is probably something you could relate to in yours. It's, like, I've heard things about the civil rights movement my whole life. And so it wasn't a topic I was unfamiliar with, but being able to, like, be that deep in someone's perspective of being able to, like, almost feel it, how they felt it. Like, you almost felt like you were there. And so, for me, I guess, like, you can read dates and stuff, like Martin Luther King dying feels like a whole different lifetime that it happened. And just, like, some of these things, like, that I was saying, or, like, when it was 1990 something, and I was like, oh, I was born in the 90s. And so it kind of gave me this feeling like it wasn't as distant as it really felt.
Yeah.
That was, like, the big perspective, like, I took, like, it felt like a different world ago, and it's just like, no, this was, like, happening over in the South. Like, some of this, I'm like, wow, my dad was alive, like, living a normal life in California when, like, this was still happening there.
There's people alive that were born on plantations and lived through, like, Jim Crow laws and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the same with the Indians because we think, like, oh, that was so long ago, like cowboys and Indians, like, or whatever, pilgrims and Indians, but they're experiencing, like, the effects of it still to this day, like, and it's almost, in some ways, it might be worse. It's almost like they've completely just dominated this entire culture, like, and just, like, has their foot on them like this, you know, just holding them down. There's no way out.
Yeah. Have you ever been to a res?
I haven't. I don't think I've been to, like, a real one.
So, like, in Yakima, they have, like, reservations out there, and I go to Yakima a lot because I have family there, and my aunt, like, she would go buy cigarettes from the res because you could get them really cheap.
Fireworks.
And when driving through there, it's, like, crazy because you can, like, see the difference of poverty just, like, literally driving down a, like, dirt road. It like turns to, like, something so sad from, like, a city life, and it's, like, right there.
Yeah,
like,
it is. It's tough, and, you know, I guess where Sherman Alexie doesn't know how to, like, help them get out of it. Like, he addresses it, but he doesn't know how to, like, change it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so it seems like John Lewis was kind of like, well, we have to try.
Yeah.
And he just, you know, so he just was, like, doing anything that he could. Like, what's next? Oh, I want to be the first Black guy at this college.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously that didn't work out, but
yeah,
his life was at stake.
And it was, like, interesting because he talks about when he was a child and this, like, his strong, like, personality carried through. Like, he was, like, a quiet guy, and he even says, like, he was quiet, like, he wasn't very handsome and stuff like that, but he was like, I was passionate about what I was passionate about, and I was willing to do what it took. And so when other people were upset that all these other people were getting credit for the movement, like, they were started, he was like, I never cared about, like, you know, getting the attention. like, for example, in Selma, when they were, like, there for a year already before Martin Luther King ever came, a bunch of the people in his group were pissed.
Oh, yeah.
They were like, we've been doing all this, and here comes the SLC.
He gets the credit.
Yeah, like, they're getting all the credit for this. And he was like, what's it matter? The people wanted him to come
Right.
here. And, like, we're here to help the people. So if they want them there, who are we to be like, we want the attention? Like, when this goes good, like, that's not what this should be about. And he was, like, always, like, never about himself.
Yeah.
He was, like, about the people.
Wow.
Really, and it was, like, incredible. I'm, like, I couldn't believe, like, I'd never heard of him.
Yeah.
Like, which wasn't, I'm like, schools don't talk about that.
No. They talk about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, who was not the first person to do the bus sit in or whatever, like.
Yeah.
But she had that name, and it was just kind of, just kind of how it goes.
Yeah, because even with their Freedom Ride things, they were like, we weren't even the first Freedom Ride. There was one 20 years before that, like, it didn't go good at all, but someone else tried first. But they were
inspired.
And they were like, that's what gave, like, let's try again now.
Yeah, it's so, I don't know, it's interesting to learn about those types of things from people who live it. Yeah. You know? I feel like that was kind of the thing with my book. Like I was saying, I wanted to, like, rip the headphones off. I wanted to, like, slam the book shut and, like, why am I reading this, you know? Just because it was just horrible, like, the stuff that they go through. But it definitely is two contrasting ways of kind of trying to get out of it. Because, I mean, Sherman Alexie doesn't talk much about, like, trying to take his people, like, raise them up. Which, that seems like that was John Lewis's whole thing, is to raise his people up and, just, I don't know, I didn't mention, but I was going to mention my author, actually, recently he had gotten, like, accusations of, not, like, sexual assault, but, like, harassment and, like, basically pretending to, be interested in someone for their work, but really, like, he wanted to sleep with them or something. Oh. But it was interesting when I read that, because I was reading the book and I'm like, I understand it. I get, like, how this guy is like that, because
like, he's been through some stuff.
So it is interesting because same thing, there might be people who aren't John Lewis fans at all. Like, maybe they hate him.
Well, and, like, that was the case, like, how I was mentioning earlier with, because he was, like, about all people, not just his people, that he really got on the wrong side. They couldn't buy his vote. So when they were doing stuff in, like, city council, they're like, hey, we want to pass this. Like, we need you to say yes. And he's like, no. Yeah. No, like, this is against everything I believe in. I've, like, stood this ground my whole life. You're not going to change me now.
Well, and then, and you read that and you see, and you can feel that from him.
Yeah, especially, like, I'm like, after all he's been through, if I did that, got my skull broken, spent summers in, like, a hot prison, picking cotton in prison, like, yeah, you wouldn't change my mind on topics, too, because I'm not just speaking about it. Like, I lived it, and he lived it all. He wasn't just on the side. When he was, like, in a position better than the people in the South who were going through it, like, he was going and living it with them to make it better for them. Like, hey, like, we want to get you votes. And he was, like, watching his friends die. Yeah. And, like, that's crazy. And it talks about, like, one summer they were in Mississippi, and in the span of 3 months, they had, like, 450 incidents, which included, like, drive-by shootings, beatings, church bombings, just regular bombings. And, like, that was in the span of 3 months just trying to register people to vote.
Yeah,
and this, like, never deterred them from like trying to help the people. They're like, yeah, some of us are gonna lose our lives, and that's sad, but, like, we're never gonna fight back. Like, we're this, like, that nonviolent
just
thing.
Live
like,
it.
They practice how to drop to the ground, get shot by the hoses, get attacked by dogs. They would practice beating each other up to how to withstand beatings, how to block your body, and
that's so against, like, human nature too, because you naturally just, like, want to fight back. But yeah, it's I don't know. I guess both of the books, just because we're out of time now, but I think it's definitely, it's something to learn about, like, people's traumas and, like, what they've gone through to get where they're at. And I feel like, when you understand that, then you understand them better. And so it's like we're in this climate of everyone, like, kind of hating each other or hating each other's opinions. Yeah. But it's like we don't actually know what each other have been through. And if we were to find that out and, like, fully understand how people are, I think we would be a lot more open to different views, different opinions, and different ways that people do things.
Yeah, and
So.
I think that's like the beauty too of like we read these books and they were probably topics we knew somewhat about, but like didn't necessarily connect to in the extent. But when you get to like read it in the way we read it, it's like, well, now I feel like attached to everything I wasn't a part of because I see it from a completely different light.
Absolutely.
And that's like the thing of like you're saying, like you don't always understand, but when you get to understand, like it brings out like more passion about things. And like the diversity aspect of like, okay, like in my book there was like racial diversity, poverty, like differences of ideas, and like it was like just this big thing of all these people see things different, and they're like, most of them want the same goal, but they're like not willing to compromise. But maybe if they knew what each other was been through, like it might have changed their mind a little bit.
Yeah, and especially in your book, it does seem that they that's ways that they were able to come together, is like this is a community experience.
Yeah.
This bad stuff. So yeah, I think overall, I mean, I hated my book. It sounds like yours is pretty good. I'd be interested in reading about it, but yeah, I think this overall was a pretty good assignment.
Yeah.
You know, it is nice to experience that other side that we're unaware of.
Yeah.
From a different perspective, and to get into their mind a little bit. So
yeah, it like takes away the distance
yeah.
that it feels. It's because like these people, there's people around us all the time that are like battling different things of diversity, whether it's mental health or their race or something they've been through. And it's like some of these things we feel so disconnected to.
Yeah.
And like we wouldn't understand. And like once you like are able to open your eyes more, like, oh hey, like this happens right here, like, you know, the civil rights and racism, like it all feels part of it, but there's people that still battle with it every day.
Yeah.
And like I don't know when your book took place in, but like how I've been to a like that's still today.
Yeah.
Like things have changed, but a lot of this stuff is really prevalent in society.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Hopefully we continue to, you know, keep going up instead of going down. And yeah, I don't know, two different perspectives of kind of a similar issue, racism, you know, equality, things like that. So yeah, I think that'll do it. What do you think?
Yeah.
Any last words?
I would recommend, like, if you have time, like, check out more books on the list, because I think that's what I'm gonna do, because I like being able to see stuff from a new perspective, and it gives me a new understanding. It
really does. It creates I think like empathy.
Yeah.
In a way, like you can more understanding. Not like you feel bad for somebody, but you understand.
Yeah, and I think it's important to like not let these issues feel so distant, because like it doesn't matter what the topic is. It's like these diversity things still are happening, and if we can find a way, it's easy to not pay attention to things when you feel like it doesn't happen to you. And it's like, okay, I know this happens, but this happened a long time ago. Things are changing now, and you can convince yourself of things to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's like you said, you got really uncomfortable reading your book and you didn't want to read it, but that's like the reality. Those things happened to him. And like I got uncomfortable when I was reading like the treatment, like this happened to them. And so it's good to be able to pay attention, like people face this, people go through this, and it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes you. Like you need to know, because if we keep pretending it doesn't happen, like we're further away from change than we need to be.
Absolutely. Well said. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for our video. Hope you enjoy, whoever watches this. See ya!